Shall we start?
Yep, sure.
Okay. So good evening, everyone, and thank you all for being with us on this Wednesday evening. My name is Dr. Emilie Zong. I'm an assistant professor in the Environmental Humanities from the Department of Humanities and Creative Writing, Hong Kong Baptist University. And today we have an amazing panel, Climate and Justice, Local and Global Perspectives from Hong Kong, where we will be talking about how, as artists, academics, and educators, we can drive inclusive solutions to climate change. Let me do some quick introductions to our multidisciplinary panel today. So we have award-winning artist Michelle Fung, whose work engages with pressing environmental issues such as plastic waste, pollution, and climate change. We also have Dr. Emilie Chow-Quesada, who is an assistant professor from the Department of English Language and Literature, also here from BU. We also have Dr. Emilie Tran, who is Director of European Studies from the Department of Government and International Studies here at BU. We also have Dr. Lisa Lam and Dr. Jason Ho, who drive the Center for Innovative Service Learning here at Hong Kong Baptist University. And finally, we also have myself, who will be today's last presenter. So welcome, all of you. Let me begin by saying today's panel is also organized in response to a global initiative titled Worldwide Teaching. And I will hand over to today's co-host, Dr. Jason Ho, who will introduce to us about the initiative. Please, Jason.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Emilie. And I should say Emilie Zong, because for our audience here today, you might notice that very, very nice. Coincidentally, we have actually 3 Emilies here with a slightly different spelling. So thank you very much. I hope that we have also got some non-local overseas audience joining us, precisely because as Emilie Zong has nicely introduced at the very beginning, this is essentially a global initiative that really gathers around climate concerned faculty members, students, and basically anyone who would like to say something and listen to something about climate changes, politics, etc. So I myself really like this idea of gathering different people from different disciplinary backgrounds to have this virtual meeting here to express our concerns. So as Emilie has mentioned at the very beginning, this is part of a global international initiative. And let me play a short video, which is of course not from us, but precisely from this initiative. The initiative would like each event at the very beginning to play this particular video so that you will have a better sense of what this particular event is about. So let me share this video with all of you.
Welcome to the Worldwide Teach-In on Climate and Justice.
Bienvenue à la conférence mondiale éducative sur le climat et la justice.
Bem-vindo ao encontro participativo global sobre clima e justiça.
Today, we are coming together globally to share our concern for the climate crisis, for climate justice, and to find solutions. We understand that carbon pollution is causing the planet to heat up. We see the fires and floods, the droughts and crop failures. This teach-in will help us all move from despair about this to determination together to change the future. Why climate and justice? Global warming is profoundly unjust. People in low-income communities are already suffering the most as the planet heats up. In the last year, tens of millions of people have been forced to leave their homes by climate change, more refugees than from conflict and violence combined. We can stop this. We can stabilize the climate, and in doing so, create jobs and opportunities for all in a new green economy. What will it take? Our hard work and the courage to face it.
It's not really that bad.
Oh, yeah, it is.
climate change, it's pretty close to home for South Carolinians.
From the UK's wettest February on record to raging wildfires in California.
These winds die down. This fire is unstoppable.
Ferocious fires scorch terrain as Earth
Water
heats.
shortages forcing more than 13 million people to have to boil their water before they can use it. Marcus Moore.
It can take air out of my little brother's lungs.
What if it submerges my Bangladeshi land of love, magic, stories, and songs?
I'm afraid my hands can do nothing to stop the downpour.
I'm afraid it will leave us alone in a world of concrete and plastic.
Groom Gaia into a vacant void.
It will take the green and leave us in the dark.
I'm afraid it will bring out the worst in people.
Uprooting our families and communities.
Leaving our children to an irreversible nightmare.
Taking the beauty of each season from us.
Causing untold suffering that could have been prevented.
I am afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid. I'm afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid. What are we being taught?
What are they teaching us?
Economics, literature, math, engineering, history, music.
What meaning do they hold if our climate swallows us whole?
I can be courageous.
I can be courageous.
I can use my voice and passion, keep fighting even on the days it feels hopeless.
I can fight for my people.
I can hold on to the beauty we still have.
I can save our land against this man-made havoc.
I can be a voice for the sky, the soil, and the sea.
I can make a good future for our next generation.
I can stand up, even when it feels easier to sit down.
I can love my brothers and sisters and protect their lives, because we have the same mother, the great Mother Earth.
I can be louder than polluters that try to silence life.
I can do my part and lift others around me to do better.
I can ask my teacher to make climate.
I can ask my teacher to make climate a class.
Make climate a class.
Make climate a class.
Make climate a class.
Okay, so I hope that you have enjoyed this introductory video, and I also hope that you have got a better sense of what this workshop is going to be about. I think a few very important takeaways of the video would be how every one of us, each of us, regardless of our background, can contribute to changing what climate and politics is bringing about to our environment, which also echoes to today's event tagline. So climate changes basically matter to everyone. And I also like the message being brought about by the video saying that people from different disciplinary background, literature, mathematics, you name it, can cast an impact on climate changes. So without further ado, let me pass the time back to Emilie Zong to introduce our first speaker of today's panel. Emilie, please.
Thanks, Jason. Let's kick off this exciting panel and delve into the diverse perspectives that everyone has to share. So each panel member will have 10 minutes. And as a heads up, I or Jason may have to cut you off at 10 minutes. So our first speaker is Michelle. Please, the floor is yours, Michelle.
I'm trying to share my presentation. I don't see it. Can you tell a joke while I retrieve my presentation? I don't see it. Give me a second.
Okay, so in our previous discussion, oh yeah, sure.
You want to finish your joke?
Oh, good. Please go ahead.
There. Okay, thank you so much today. Thank you, Emilie, Zong, for the invitation. And I feel really, really proud of being part of this initiative, especially after Jason sharing the video. Thank you so much for sharing. some of this may be repetition to students who were just with me for the past hour. I'll give a brief overview of my practice. So hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Fung. I'm a Hong Kong Canadian interdisciplinary artist. I work in Hong Kong. Actually, I did my MBA at Baptist as well. So we're all parts of the same community. All my works revolves around building a futuristic world in 2084. And there are 5 imaginary countries in this world. Here are the 5 delegates from the 5 countries at the 2084 G5 meeting. And G5 is the 5 great industrial nations. So the 5 delegates, the 5 countries from the left, we have Dreamland, Northlandia, Contradictoria, the Republic of Strata, and the Aristocratic Union. So here is a dialogue where the delegate of Contradictoria proposes, if animals can learn to eat plastic, why can't children? And then the Republic of Strata says, okay, awesome, this is great. So my works are a lifelong project. I began in 2015 and they will go until 2084. Hopefully I'll still be alive then. And there are many different parts and a progression. So I will just touch on some of them today. My overall theme or my overall research is to navigate our changing landscape due to climate change in the Anthropocene through practice-led research. That is quite a mouthful, so I'm gonna just deconstruct that a little bit. What does it mean? It means really our landscape is changing so fast because of climate change. We have floods, we have forest fires, we have extreme temperature, we have displacement because of climate change, but how do we make sense of it? And for me, art is my way of making sense of this. So as I make my art, this is my way of understanding and finding solutions with climate change. And climate change in the Anthropocene. So Anthropocene is a term that in 2002, is a term a scientist came up, Paul Cruzen. So he said, okay, the Anthropocene is an era where us human beings become the most powerful impact on the environment. I do want to say this term is very problematic though, because it's very Eurocentric, it's a very Western notion. So through my work, I will also explore, is this really what it is? And a few of my underlying research, micro research areas would be the Arctic resources in the 21st century. I'll briefly talk about that soon. New visual language for landscape paintings. So for example, how we portray a place is it really reflects how we see a place. So for example, the Arctic, early European pioneers, they actually painted the landscapes very romantically. Whereas the indigenous population, they never portrayed the landscape because they were parts of it. So it's very interesting. And I mentioned the indigenous. So I'm also very interested in the indigenous voices in environmental issues because they're always marginalized. So the first prequel of all my works was Plastic, Plastic Everywhere, in which plastic becomes the most popular snack in this futuristic world in 2084. The works have been presented as an illustrated book, a moving drawing short film, installations, paintings, etc. The second of the narratives is Polluter. Polluter is the narrative of Contradictoria. This is a narrative on air pollution. In 2084, the imaginary country Contradictoria solves their air pollution problem with Plan Polluter, which is to condense air pollution into building bricks. And with these bricks, they build these floating artist colonies in the sky. Artists can live, work, show for free forever. This sounds too good to be true. It just might be. So the works have also been presented in different forms, like installations, paintings, performances. I don't have time to go into all of them, but I would like to share with you something that's we're working on right now, is not out in the public. This is the film that we are working on. There at Polluta, there are many different aspects, and this is a work in progress. There's no music yet, but you will get the gist of it. So you can see from this. Short clip, I'm trying to really address so many environmental issues, topics in the film. For example, air pollution, energy consumption, or meat eating culture, food waste. So this gives you a window into what the film is about. And if you're curious, please follow as the film is being made. The next phase of my research will be later this year. I will go to the North Pole to conduct my research on Northlandia, the next imaginary country. And it is really about how the Arctic resources impact the rest of the world. I'm really excited about that. I'm going to collect oral histories from the local communities, from the indigenous and children's population, and make that into a work of art. As I mentioned, this is going to be a lifetime project. These will be projects maybe in 10 or 20 years, but briefly mention it. Dreamland is going to be the use of water, it's going to water war. And the Republic of Strata, I want to address climate refugees and how the population is displaced because of climate. And with the Aristocratic Union, I really want to talk about alternative living spaces. Flood, the Netherlands is doing such a good job with building dams just because they're so rich, but what happens to poorer countries? And all my works really take observations of our world today and build that into a futuristic narrative. I want to briefly end with two other examples. So this is one work that I always talk about. It's a graphic novel where the author, a French comic artist, he goes through his own personal journey to navigate climate change. And in the beginning of the book, he decides, I'm not going to do any overseas travels because I cannot justify my carbon footprint. So I'm going to turn down every single professional travel commitment, which was a shock to me. What do you mean? Like, you can't travel for what? And towards the end of the book, he finds a way to travel to, I think, Belgium with a train ride and 2 ferries, and then another train and then a bus ride. So instead of 2 hours, he took 2 days to get there. And I thought, there's always a choice. It's what you decide to do. And last but not least, I want to share an article that just came out yesterday from BBC. There is an exhibition, an interdisciplinary exhibition in Chicago in a nonprofit gallery. And I want to end with this quote that it's really not, we really have to, sorry, I'm just looking at that quote. So it's really not numbers that appeal to us to make changes. Art can really be a punch in the gut, but it does not have to be horrifying. It can also be inspiring. There is also a place for optimism, because if we don't have optimism, we won't take action. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I'm really looking forward to your new film and upcoming works as well. And our next speaker is Dr. Emilie Chow-Quesada. So please, Emilie.
Right, so thank you so much. I'll just share the screen with you. Right, so is it working?
Yep.
Great, so good afternoon, everyone. Michelle's talk was really fascinating. So I don't know how to continue, that's why honestly, but then, as Emilie Zong introduced, I am actually from the Department of English Language and Literature. So I actually work on post-colonial literature, especially African and also Hong Kong literature, utopian and also dystopian studies, and also representations of Blackness in Hong Kong. So what I usually do is actually I read books and I write articles and to make sense of how literature literary works that I study could be related to the wider world. And so obviously I'm not an expertise in climate change at all, and I don't directly work on that. But then the very thing that I was thinking when thinking about this workshop, this event, is that the literary world is also changing as well. So instead of locking ourselves in an ivory tower, I think we try to have a lot of dialectic relationship with the world as well. So I'm just going to offer some of my thoughts to you, and I'm looking forward to learning from all of you and also other presenters as well. So basically, this is the way that we most people in the literary disciplines look at literary text. So even when we are looking at the first thing, literary text, say Hamlet, we have different kinds of schools of thoughts that would allow us to extract sort of different meanings from it. So of course, as you could see from the diagram here, lots of these school of thoughts, such as feminism, post-colonialism, Marxist theories, all of those are also relevant to cultural studies, philosophy, arts, and also architecture. And one of them that I would like to highlight specifically today would be eco-criticism, which is closely related to the topic that we are discussing today. So I know that most of you from Emilie Zong's class know something about eco-criticism as well, so I'm just going to be really brief. So from the perspective of literary studies, eco-criticism emerged as a school of thought of criticism around late 1980s, and it is the latest emerging field in literary studies that studies that who we as human beings to the environment, attesting to the interconnectedness between human beings, our cultures, and also the nature, according to Breslin. So some key assumptions of the school of criticism would be that it emphasizes the interconnectedness of all things, including nature and also culture. The assumption that nature, the world, and also humanity possesses ontological status, that is, nature literally exists and cannot be contained or fully described or encoded by humanity's language, concepts, or beliefs. So there's to say there's always a sense of intransparency between what we're trying to narrate and also what we could really see in reality and what nature really is. And also advocates a literal saving of planet Earth, not only for the present generations, but also a sense of anticipation for the generations to come. And so as suggested here, the school of criticism emerged in the 1980s, but the 1980s is also the height of actually post-colonial studies. During the time, lots of colonized countries, and as Michelle mentioned just now, perhaps also the marginalized communities began to gain independence over the world. And it is also during the same time that they begin to face a lot of socio-political environmental and also economic problems that many regard as the legacies of European imperialism, colonialism, that could be dated back to, of course, scramble for Africa in the late 19th century, and also even perhaps the Atlantic slave trade and also the Indian slave trade. It is also the very reason why it comes to some critics like, as you can see here, Ihika and also Newell, Rose and Hans, that any post-colonial critique must be thoroughly eco-critical at the same time. Sorry. And particularly, Ihika and also Newell notes in the introduction to a special issue on environmental transformations journal regarding African literature. They add this together, saying that with the diverse genres, themes, and frameworks through which contemporary African writers address topics such as urbanization, cross-species communication, nature, and climate change, they help to define African environmental writing. They look at the literary strategies adopted by creative writers to convey the impact of environmental transformation in narratives that are historically informed by a century of colonialism, nationalist political activism, urbanization, and also post-colonial migration. I think, but of course, writers don't simply write, but a lot of them are also activists as well. So here I would like to introduce you a very important Nigerian writer called Ki Saro-Wiwa, who died actually quite tragically in 1995. So he was a member of the Ogoni people, an ethnic minority in Nigeria. He was a writer and also a very important environmental activist. He actually led a non-violence campaign against environmental degradation by the operations of the multinational petroleum industry, especially the Royal Dutch Shell Company near the Niger Delta area. And in 1995, he was sentenced to death along with 8 other activists in most regarded as an injustice trial. So I'm just going to share a short clip with you for roughly 2 minutes.
Preservation of the environment in Ogoniland and the Niger Delta, but was executed with 8 others in what was later infamously called the Ogoni 9. 25 years after, the story of Ken Saro-Wiwa still draws attention to the battered ecosystem of ethnic minorities of the region blessed with crude oil. TVC's Ovieteme George examines the activism that led to his death by the last military dictatorship in Nigeria.
We are going to demand our rights peacefully, non-violently, and we shall win.
Born in Bane, Kana local government area of Rivers State on the 10th of October 1941, Kenule Beson Saro-Wiwa was from Ogoni, a minority ethnic group in Nigeria. A graduate of English, University of Ibadan, Oyo State, Ken Saro-Wiwa was a prolific writer who deployed wit and literary proficiency in many works of art.
Despair. He cursed the earth for spouting oil, black gold they called it, and he cursed the gods for not drying the oil wells. What did it matter that millions of barrels of oil were mined and exported daily, so long as this poor woman wept those tears of despair?
So obviously, we don't have the time to finish the whole video, but I think one of the things that I would like to highlight with Saro-Wiwa is that despite his violent and tragic death, his legacy remains. And
preservation of the environment.
And for example, and Ihika, who is now an associate professor of English at Yale, when he was an undergraduate study in Nigeria at the height of the unrest of the Niger Delta that continues until the millennium, militants were actually setting fire to oil installations and kidnapping oil workers in the region. And later he published a book called Naturalizing Africa, Ecological Violence, Agency, and Post-Colonial Resistance in African Literature. And it was also based on this particular publication that he conducted an interview with later. And when he was being asked how might literary text help to transform how we care for our environment, he says that, I quote, literature affords an ability to move us beyond the constraints of history and exact science. Its shape-shifting ability enables imaginative possibility. It allows stories to reach the human part of us in a way that pamphlets or textbook may not. So I think that's sort of echo the video that Jason showed us at the very beginning of the section, in terms of we learned lots of things at school, economics, mathematics, literature even, but how is that relevant to the world that we're living? I think that is an answer that Ihike actually offered us here. So in a nutshell, I think I'm running out of time. So basically what I would like to briefly share, I think, is that literature, although it's not directly as the sort of front slide, so to speak, in terms of tackling climate change, but obviously I think it stirs our emotions, it appeals to our empathy, it allows our thoughts to precipitate, and also led us to hopefully to a better world and a better future. In a way, when we look at climate change via African literature, I think it is also a way for us to look at a matrix of various discourses and elements, such as agencies, discourses, narratives, power, and also people. So before I end this section, I would just like to read a very brief poem to all of you that from a Kenyan writer written 2 years ago by Alexandra Opikoch. So just very quickly, I hope you will find that enlightening as well. So I stand as the silver sand beaches where Francis Xavier was buried, looking at pillar of Vasco da Gama, the point at which the son of Spain hoped to the land masses at the city of Menandi. I look at my dear love, the beauteous Indian Ocean, as her tidal face struggles under the soft rays of the tired sun on the verge of this soonest set. She looks annoyed and downcast. Oh, my love, what happened to you there in deep seas? Cheer up, love, for you are the anchor of my heart. Regret not the little of those who vilify your face, with tanks of oil leaking into your heart, as they scamper here and there like mad ones, in search of dolphins, squids, and octopus, to kill their mercers for money and power. They know not how you cry and shed torrents, or grievous tears as they kill your sirens. Forgive them, dear sweetheart, they know not what they are doing. Already they gave you a miserable name, this name Indian Ocean, as if you are proud of it, or else if happily in love with caste of India. I've renamed you the Love Ocean with a promise never to pollute you. Neither will I give away ships of slavery to cross your body with the crying slaves captured from hinterland of poor Africa and transit to Arabia for hot neighbor. I will keep you clean and safe, my love. For all the days I will be with you. I pray you preserve your volcanic anger, lest your vomit tsunamis and tornadoes to the innocent islands and seaside dwellers. I pray, darling, you don't go ahead with the foul idea of swallowing Mombasa islets. Forgive her for the sake of our love we have between you and me, as Asanda Rigonaut. That's all for my sharing. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Emilie, for that poetic ending, and also sharing with us the legacy of Saraviva eco-criticism and literature's contemporary relevance in a climate changing environment. Yes, thank you. Our next speaker is Emilie. Please, Emilie.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning to wherever you are in the world. So I am talking to you from a very different perspective, from the perspective of my department, which is the Department of Government and International Studies. And I will share something about how public administration and European studies and what we do in our programs, in our classes, can also contribute to address and mitigate these issues of climate change and social justice in the world and in Hong Kong in particular. So without further ado, let me go through this. I would want to share with you first and the audience of the world about Hong Kong. This is a worldwide teaching initiative, and I believe that many regions or cities across the world are talking something about themselves. And this is the idea to show something about Hong Kong and the environmental challenges that we are facing in Hong Kong. As far as I'm concerned, I would say that in Hong Kong, we are faced with 6 major environmental challenges related to climate change, but mainly as shown in the video by Jason and mentioned by my colleagues, Emilie and Emilie before me, many of those challenges are man-made. And in Hong Kong, we see that they are indeed man-made. And we start with outdoor air pollution. One of the top environmental issues in Hong Kong, it is indeed air pollution. And in 2021, mind you, air pollution was estimated to have led to 1,329 premature deaths in Hong Kong and a total economic loss of 15.8 billion Hong Kong dollars. And that was the cost of air pollution in Hong Kong. Next, second environmental challenge that we see in Hong Kong is water pollution. Hong Kong is a unique region for those of you who know Hong Kong. It is a city surrounded by the South China Sea, beautiful sea, and home to a wide range of different marine environments. However, in the 1970s and 1980s, all the dirty water was just put out to the sea. So there was no power plant to recycle and clean the water before wasting it to the sea. And as a result, Hong Kong seawater was extremely polluted with lack of oxygen and increased bacteria level. Fortunately, in the 1990s, and to today, we have now plants who help clean the water of Hong Kong. But still, you can see, because of lots of vessels and transportation and other issues with the waste, we do have these pollutants in the Hong Kong waters. Number 3, we have the landfill waste. And you may know that every year in Hong Kong, we have 4.17 million tons of solid waste that go into the landfills. And during the coronavirus pandemic, it was even worse. Landfills' problem basically is that they produce gas emission, especially methane, when the waste is being decomposed. So you can see that with global warming, Hong Kong is highly contributing to climate change with this landfill waste. And so far today, it is still a huge problem in Hong Kong. Fourth problem in Hong Kong, I would say, is food waste. For those of you who live in Hong Kong, we enjoy Hong Kong as being an international food paradise, and Hong Kong has a reputation of affordable yet stunningly exquisite international cuisines. However, there is a food waste that is equally high in the city and one of the most pressing environmental issues in Hong Kong. So each day, over 3 tons of food waste are sent to Hong Kong landfills, the very same landfill I just talked to you about now. So this is a major issue. And next to the food waste you see on the picture, you see a lot of plastics as well. And I will talk about this just right now, because Hong Kong also generates 3.9 billion disposable food and drink container, mostly in plastic, every year. So it means that every Hong Kong resident use 170 takeaway meals and 180 disposable drinks. And with the pandemic, the closure of restaurants, we have a lot of takeaway options, and we have been increasing on this plastic pollution. So you see, those are all the environmental challenges, and all these together contribute to what? Contribute to the loss of our biodiversity in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is known for its pink dolphin, or known also as the Chinese white dolphin. It has been spotted, and Hong Kong waters have been the home of this pink dolphin for centuries, first mentioned in the Tran dynasty. However, it is estimated that only a few hundred, 300 animals are left in the Hong Kong waters. So you see, those are the challenges that are pressing in Hong Kong, and that contribute also to not only climate change, but also to social justice. Because imagine your life when you live nearby the water, when you are a fisherman and you have to rely on fishing to make your living, when you live in those buildings facing the landfills, the type of air you are breathing. So all this relates to social justice as well. So after having told you about the problems we are facing in Hong Kong, I'd like to offer you with a review of some of the actions in order to mitigate the impacts of these environmental challenges. And I would say, and this is where my background comes in political science, public administration, I would say that there are two-level approach to mitigate climate change. One of this is policy level, and the other one is the community level. So let us start with the policy level. Policy level, basically, my department is about the Department of Government Studies, right? So we study what the governments are doing, and although we have those pressing momentous challenges in Hong Kong, we are glad that last year the Hong Kong government has introduced two landmark bills that have been long-awaited bills. First of all, that is to stop the illegal traffic of wildlife that is now labeled as a serious crime in Hong Kong, and not only talking about the mules and the individuals, but the organizations behind it. So we have this law passed last year. Another landmark bill is the waste charging scheme. And sometime next year around, households, every household who wants to dispose a rubbish bin, they will have to buy a plastic bag, a rubbish bin bag from the government. So basically each family will have to pay for the rubbish that they produce. And this scheme has been introduced in many other regions across the world, and a lot of lobbyists and groups, NGO groups have been asking for this scheme to happen, and it is going to happen in Hong Kong. So you see, at the government level, it is possible to act through making laws and passing laws, although it has taken time, almost 10 years, to think about these laws, to debate them, and to have them accepted by the legislature and the community. Of course, the government, in addition to passing important laws, has also conducted a number of campaigns and educational initiatives. For example, these posters that you see is to prevent, to raise awareness against the food waste. And the government also has opened O Park, which is a food recycling center, in order so they disposed food, wasted food, go to this plant, and they are transformed into energy. So we are trying to recycle into a greener Hong Kong. At the community level, and this is my last slide, and I see that Jason is smiling and Dr. Lisa Lam should be also smiling, because at the community level, we can also act. And in our European Studies program in my department, we have been very active collaborating with the Center for Innovative Service Learning at HKBU, especially with Dr. Jason Ho here and Dr. Lisa Lam, in order to promote service learning. So here you can see my students, and I'd like to say hello to my colleague Celine, who is listening, who has organized last fall a beach cleaning in relation with French initiatives in Hong Kong. So sous les déchets la plage, basically under the waste we have the beach, and our European Studies students spent a Sunday in order to clean beaches in Lamma Island. We also have workshops on climate change, and we take our knowledge to visit companies and organizations and schools in order to raise awareness. So our students go to teach in companies how to mitigate climate change. We organize all sorts of social justice type of intervention. We combat also food waste. You see my students cooking, preparing 3,000 meals for the working poor in Hong Kong. With my students, we also visit the plants that recycle dirty waters in Hong Kong, and we also collect trash in the neighborhood of the university. So you see, all this to say that at the political level and individual and community level, we are aware of these issues in Hong Kong and trying to do something in our respective areas. So my take-home message, basically, it is a quote from Angel Gurria, who was the OECD Secretary General, and he said that phrase back in 2008, so quite some years ago, and he said, climate change, it's a matter of political will. And indeed, you know, all of us, we can all do something in our individual lives, but at the end of the day, it has to have a political leadership behind it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Emilie, for guiding us through those challenges and concrete actions in both legal policy and civic terms about driving forward a greener Hong Kong. Our upcoming speakers include Dr. Lisa Lam and Dr. Jason Ho from our Center for Innovative Service Learning.
Okay, thank you. So let me share my screen and then. Okay, so hello everyone, and I'm so happy to be here with you. And I'm very impressed with all the ideas and sharing from the experts, and I must say that I myself is not an expert in this area. So why am I here? And this event is started because HKBU is a member of the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network, in short, SDSN. And when the university representative left last year, I was invited to take up the role. And for reasons I do not know, so do not ask me, but I received a message about this very meaningful event, and I love the idea. And I'm so happy that Jason helped organize the event, and we have this very positive responses from all the friends here. So thank you so much again. And for this event, and so Emilie talked about community engagement and service learning, and HKBU students, we do have a lot of students engaging in environmental issues, climate change activities. So we're going to work on this a bit today. So service learning, I believe many of you already know this. It is about applying knowledge, application of knowledge, of what you've learned in class, and then apply them in the real world. So such as climate change, environmental issues, it is a form of experiential learning. So going out of the classroom and getting hands-on service-based experience. Say for climate change, environmental issues, they are some of the biggest threats in our world today. And at the same time, the concept and the ideas, they are so big, so complex, so huge that many of us, including students, and I believe many of us here, we might feel overwhelmed and powerless sometimes. But as Michelle mentioned, there are always things that we can choose to do, and service learning is one of them. So we do have we have a lot of service learning courses here at BU, in which we hope there will be high impact practices coming from these courses. So service learning is about learning the knowledge, applying them into service, putting them into actions, and also reflection. Reflection here is very important, as many of the speakers have mentioned. It is about this sensitivity and awareness. And service learning is a way of urging us to turn our ordinary projects into value-driven actions. And we have to regularly reflect on our practices, on our everyday life, and also importantly, our own complicity in the crisis. So we're not outside. We're not outside trying to solve the problem, criticize the problem. We're a part of it, and we have a very big role to play. And so for service learning, we hope students will learn through very structured experience guided by teachers. They will turn their ordinary course projects into actions. And then in the long run, they will go from individual to collective actions, and then from individual changes to collective transformation to systemic transformation. And so global crisis, as we all know, it is a collective problem, and we need to solve this collectively at all levels of our society. So I'll say that service learning is a tool for students to actively engage in our social and global issues, and it also generates a learning space where we can learn through perspective taking, understanding the complexity of issues, taking into account the perspectives of different stakeholders. And in the long run, we can develop a sense of responsibility and ways to address these global challenges. So there are some examples of local actions being taken by our BU students, and I'll pass the time to Jason to cover some of them. Jason, please.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. So as Lisa just mentioned, in the following section, I will be sharing some of the many service learning endeavors that our students have been trying out in the past few years. The offering departments range from science, geography, to social sciences, and even humanities. So you can tell how that really echoes to the short video that I've shown you guys at the very beginning, that literally anyone from whatever disciplines can actually contribute to climate changes and energy problems. Let me begin with, for instance, our geography department. So some of these courses deal with energy problems and also the environment. For instance, what you're seeing on the slide right now, the course instructor actually organized a trip for the students to Sai-Kung, this little area in Hong Kong, to conduct a community workshop. And in this particular workshop, they also conduct surveys to see how people have to say and what they observe about energy changes. Let's go to the next slide to see how the students have reflected. For instance, they will be building together with residents over there what they call a mobile solar bubble machine. And they, as I mentioned just now, they will be also carrying out surveys to ask the residents what they feel about sustainable and renewable energy. So we always want our service learning projects to be sustainable. So the instructor, the professor, actually collect all this information being surveyed and conduct further researches on climate and energy. So definitely for some kind of research purpose. There will be other examples too, also from the Department of Geography on energy policy and analysis. Regrettably, because of COVID, this could not be conducted physically, but then the teacher actually connect different people who are all climate concerned from mainland China and also from Korea, and conduct something first of its kind, called online community workshops. So different people, different students from all these different communities, they came together, they discussed different energy and climate problems. You know, within Asia, despite the fact that we face very similar problems in terms of climate changes, different policymakers, like what Emilie mentioned in the previous section, might have very, very different policies. So they came together, have some kind of roundtable discussions, and to collect all this good practice. And in the future, hopefully this will be resumed when COVID gets better. So these will be the cases from geography. Next comes the department or different departments on science. First and foremost, physics. This is actually a very interesting course on renewable energy sources and technologies. As you can see from the pictures here, actually students visit this particular school where they have installed rooftop solar panels. So students got to know that how to generate renewable energy source in a real setting. They also prepare some kind of teaching materials for those school children with special education needs in this particular school. So they are really applying their knowledge in renewable energy resources to put into practice in this particular setting. So this will be the case of physics. After physics, you can imagine comes biology and chemistry. Biology first. We have this very devoted teacher from the Department of Biology who have been offering these two courses on toxicology and also on enzyme technology to our students over the past few years. So for this particular course, students prepare different types of PowerPoint presentations to actually reflect upon how they feel about, for example, toxic waste, harmful substance, etc. We actually define climate problems and climate changes in a very large extent and how they have larger implications on environmental health. So something on, for example, carbon cycle really matters to people. And the next course will be on enzyme technology. Now, as you know, I bet most, if all of you here are familiar with Greta Thunberg. As someone from the younger generation, they usually have got a lot to say about the climate changes, and politics, of course. So we all know that education really matters in terms of teaching the next generation. So for this particular course, our HKBU students actually co-work and collaborate with secondary school students. You can see on your right that these different students of different generations, they are working together in the laboratory in terms of some enzyme technology. So they come up with solutions together, and we always believe that climate change is definitely an intergenerational subject matter. So next comes chemistry, which is actually one of our flagship service learning courses called food analysis. Students work with this NGO called FoodLink, go to different bakeries and to collect unsold bread. As you can imagine, usually when these bakeries close at like maybe 10 p.m. at night, there's still a lot of bread that's still edible, but usually they will be thrown away. So the teacher and this particular course collaborate with this particular NGO. Students, after collecting the bread, they will carry out experiments precisely using their technical knowledge and to prepare reports for these NGOs. And later on, we distribute the bread, the food to people. So this really echoes to one of the broader implications of climate change, which is mentioned in the short video as well, which is food shortage. And last but not least, something that is already mentioned by our previous speaker, Emilie, for example, for our Department of Government and International Politics, you have already seen the picture on the left. We have Emilie students working on uncooked vegetables, which will actually be thrown away should we not have students working on these vegetables. Emilie also mentioned, for example, the extinction of pink dolphins in Hong Kong, for instance, and we have another professor working in another course, having students to carry out campaigns to save the life of the pink dolphins, etc. So, of course, these are some of our previous projects. We have something to look forward to, which of course has got something to do with different faculty members from different backgrounds. One would be with Emilie Zong. We are already having plans discussing environmental humanities to let her students, for example, create expressions on different climate change from different stakeholders. So this is something hopefully that will happen in the next academic year. We are also developing a cross-disciplinary collaboration between humanities and computer science. I've mentioned that course on food analysis, which is a bread run that students run literally for the bread. And students from computer science will help them to actually develop an app which will streamline the whole process. And last but not least, something equally exciting will be our non-local global service learning projects. I mentioned that geography project to mainland China and Korea. And hopefully when COVID gets better, there will be conference or symposium on energy crisis and policy. So basically so much about service learning and what our students have been doing to address some of the problems in relation to climate change. So if you are interested in our work, feel free to contact us, visit our website, etc. So I will now pass the time back to Emilie Zong. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Jason and Lisa, for this broad-scale insights into how we can better connect our knowledge with practices as well as wider community engagement for real changes. Thank you so much. I'm just going to remove the spotlight on Jason. How do I do so? Oh, it's already removed. That's good. So our last speaker will be me, myself. Let me share screen. Okay, good evening, everyone. Today I will draw on my teaching and research experience to share with you how the environmental humanities can help us drive climate action and social justice. So I'm currently based in the Department of Humanities and Creative Writing, and we have a range of existing and forthcoming courses about the environmental humanities to be offered. And they include, first of all, our environmental humanities key concepts field mapping course. This course aimed at introducing our students to ask humanistic questions about environmental challenges, and in which we explore key topics including land, place, local ecologies in Hong Kong, and multi-species art of noticing, environmental justice, and waste and slow violence. And students will learn important environmental justice frameworks, including ecofeminism, queer ecology, ethnic eco-criticism, and post-colonial and indigenous eco-criticisms. Second one, we have climate change literature and culture that will introduce our students to the cultural imaginations of sea level rise, ocean garbage, biodiversity, overdevelopment, resource extraction, and urban waste, also at the intersection between environmental protection and climate justice issues of race, gender, migrant worker rights, indigeneity, colonialism, and other minority livelihoods. Last, we have post-human futures. And in this course, we reimagine the boundaries of the human in an era of rapid technological mediations and ecological degradations. Through exploring cultural imaginations of the cyborg, AI, VR, or biotechnology, and trans-species encounters, while asking important questions about the new ethics, morality, and materiality that emerge in the process of radically decentering the human. So across these three courses, I highlight a shared message with my students. That is, what is underpinning our current environmental and climate crisis is the old anthropocentric notions separating so-called culture from nature, from our human and nature. And in order to question the humanities' unique contribution to the dialogue, we explore narratives, the arts, aesthetics, ethics, and history, etc., with a focus on how these culture tools, right? These tools from the humanities, they play perceptual, affective, and imaginative roles in communicating the cultures, the values, the ethics, and the responsibilities that we face in response to the ecological and planetary crisis. So we are guided by the overarching principle to develop alternative approaches and solutions to anthropocentric worldviews. And in an information age where explosive news and spectacular events saturate our screens, and where the long-term impacts of global warming and species loss may not always be sensationally visible, but also, their long-term incremental slow violence also requires our urgent attention. So one of the big questions we ask in the environmental humanities is, what stories do we tell, right? So in our courses, I encourage students in exploring narratives and images that translate long-term environmental changes into effective stories, like artworks, like literary narratives, to translate this long-term slow violence into dramatic stories of images, of narratives, to raise public awareness and climate action. right? So on the screen, I have listed multiple examples of artworks, of illustrated books, of narratives, for example, and these tell stories of a double possibility, for example, of at the same time, right? On the one hand, life's ecological flourishing, and we can see here. And on the other hand, we can also see the imminent loss of that ecological balance and harmony and flourishing, right? So therefore, these stories, they make visible the environmental devastation that has been taken for granted or forgotten or put into background in relation to the paramount importance and narratives about progress and capitalism in our current society. Some guiding principles that I encourage my students, and we do, and in teaching and learning the environmental humanities, is to include the following principles. First of all, we recognize that there is no singular human, even though the climate change and these environmental challenges requires global action, and we also recognize that the global world remains uneven, and there are hierarchies of humanness premised upon settler colonial and capitalist norms that we need to deconstruct and resist and revise. Similarly, likewise, there is no nature that is separated from the culture. And what is happening to the climate, to planet Earth, is also embedded in all levels of our individual, of our global, of our social and cultural life and lifestyles. And importantly, environmental and climate crisis is also an opportunity for us to address issues of justice, of systematic inequality and oppression, and to include the diversified perspectives of race, of gender, or of the sexual and class minority that has been neglected in mainstream discourses so far. In my own teaching pedagogy, I really highlight the importance of put into the center the role of storytelling, right? Because it is through stories that we make sense of the places and experiences we dwell, and we also apprehend the relationships and interdependencies our web of life depend on, as well as to fire up emotions and imaginations, right, for change and for a sustainable future. And speaking about storytelling, each one of us is also implicated because we are also storyteller about our own life and our own story. So our everyday choices of diet, of travel, of consumption, also, right, in the Anthropocene had biospheric influences. So to do the environmental humanities is to recognize that each one of us have a role in creating and building, right, the world that we want to shape. So there's hope and action is needed. So finally, the climate crisis is also a crisis of culture. What will the future look like? What will the future look like for minority people, right? It is a crisis of our imaginations too, of ecotopia, of dystopia, of utopia. So we need stories that also imagine alternative futures, right? That express wonder and care, and also speculate pathways to into solidarity and into change. So back to today's focus, justice. In a climate changing environment, to fully understand the concept of justice is also to unpack the complex ways that social justice entangle with environmental justice. That means we need to interrogate moments where the systematic racism, as expressed in George Floyd in his dying plea that I can't breathe, is at the same time the environmental cry of people of color and the working class poor who receive unfair share of environmental risks, health hazards, outsourced toxicity, and protection measures, and whose lungs and whose bodies literally, physically breathe in petrochemicals and polluted air. So I can't breathe. And climate justice is also a key topic in my personal research. So I'm also in literary studies, like Emilie. So I study climate fiction and environmental fiction by ethnic and immigrant Asian writers. And the writers that I research, they speculate, again, imagining alternative futures. They speculate the future sometimes as the past to come. History is coming back, where climate change exacerbates existing inequality and refugee crisis through the capitalist control of resources and the nationalist regulation of borders, rendering our planet spectral, fragmented, even as climate change spans humanity globally. So haunting is a common theme in these literary works I study, with the ghosts urging our attention to the more than human histories that have been forgotten or oppressed or silenced by dominant narratives of progress, of extraction, and of consumption. And at the same time, I also explore how these stories, how these literary works, they treat the climate crisis as an opportunity for redress, for reimagining our humans through ecological interdependence and democratic actions. And these are often informed by ecofeminist, by ethnic minority and indigenous knowledge. And locally, Hong Kong provides a setting where our environmental humanities perspectives can enable fruitful explorations of urban and rural ecologies, as well as minority livelihoods. For example, through reflexive projects of environmental humanities students at HKBU, many are presented in today's audience. They have explored ways in which climate change weighs disproportionately on the disadvantaged social groups in our society. And they include outdoor workers, including our delivery drivers, our indigenous farmers, domestic helpers, and people living in subdivided flats, for example. It is through recentering environmental justice in our everyday discussion about social vulnerability that we can better think about and discuss more inclusive, sustainable, and greener societies. So we push the agenda of environmental protection, loving our planet with inclusive agendas like attending to the disenfranchised communities in our society. And we're seeking to further deepen these projects by collaborating with service learning teams and adopting methodologies of community engagement, as mentioned by Lisa, by Jason, and by Emilie. Lastly, I just want to say that our environmental humanities really welcome collaborative communities. We are still young, but also, we appreciate that it is through interdisciplinary events, for example, like today's climate change panel, that we can build and explore ways of collaborative interdependence and climate action on planet Earth. So I really want to say that today's interdisciplinary event is very much a vivid example of ecological thinking for me. So thank you. So that's the end of my list of share. Yes. Okay, so wow, that's a really fascinating panel. We have so many diverse perspectives and different synergies building together. We can really see the connection, between literary studies with art practices, with community engagement, and with our policy making. So I am really learned a lot from everyone. Jason and Lisa, do you also have some concluding remarks for us?
Maybe before that, actually not really concluding remarks, but we can also see if our panelists have anything to add or respond to each other. But my suggestion will be, since we are already overrunning a little bit, maybe before that, we can have a really short Q&A section, because I actually scroll through the names and I'm really delighted that I can tell that some of them are not your students, Emilie. So we have some outside guests attending this workshop this particular initiative. So maybe we can open the floor and see if there are like any questions or feedback, comment, anything from our participating attendees here before maybe we give some kind of like closing remarks. Anyone would like to say something or ask something, feel free to maybe type in the chat box, or if you wish, turn on the mic, turn on the cam and talk to us.
I actually have a question for Emilie, Dr. Emilie Tran. I'm just so excited and proud to be part of it. I learned so much from every speaker. Thank you so much. I have a particular question for Dr. Emilie Tran. You mentioned that we lost a lot of money due to air pollution, something like 20 billion or 2 billion. I lost count of the number. But how do you measure it? How do you measure economic loss due to air pollution?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Fung, for your question. And the exact figure is indeed 15.8 billion due to air pollution and the over 1,300 deaths. So the data was disclosed by departmental bureaus of Hong Kong, and then NGOs compiled those data in order. So basically, when you have air pollution, you have to turn on your air conditioning, you have to take measures. So you have all discussed in order to make our life more enjoyable or more livable. So you have all these economic costs. So I'm not an economist by training, but those calculus exist, and they are done in Hong Kong by local NGOs based on official data. So that there is, and the research is out there as well.
Okay, so thanks for the question and also the answer, essentially. Anyone else from maybe our panel or our participants here?
I have a question.
Sure.
So I have a question for Michelle Fung. So Michelle, you also mentioned you're very interested in indigenous knowledge, right? And I know that you have immigration experiences as an Asian and ethnic minority in Canada. Like I'm personally myself in my own research also, very interested in the collaboration between Asian immigrant and also indigenous perspectives. I just wonder, how does this dynamic, how do you approach these collaborations with the indigenous practice?
Yeah, it's something I'm still navigating. So I lived in Canada for 17 years, and then I realized over the 17 years, I didn't really interact with the First Nations population, the indigenous population. And it really, my interest in the indigenous voice really began in Alaska. I did a climate change theme residency tour in Alaska with basically 3 other indigenous artists. And we went to 8 different communities to conduct climate themed community roundtables. And then I just began to learn more and more about their voices and how they see the world. And it's something I'm still processing six years later. So the starting point of the Northlandia narrative actually begins with Inuit mythology. And it's a Canadian indigenous population. Going forward, how do I anticipate the collaboration? Is something I'm navigating. I have something in mind. I have some scholars in mind I want to approach, but it's still too early. I'm really excited, but that's the starting point and that's the trajectory. Thank you for the question.
I would like to add on to that too, which is something that I observed. I think a lot of the panelists actually mentioned indigenous people, how we care for the land, and how the whole thing in relation to climate changes have got something to do with the marginalized, the underprivileged people. That really reminds me of how when we discuss things in relation to climate changes and politics, it's so much about that caring spirit and also empathy, which of course echo to what our center has been doing in terms of maybe not only service learning, but think about humanities, think about critical thinking, think about education as a whole. Guess what? Speaking of indigenous people, actually this worldwide teach-in, one thing that they did not ask us to do, but they suggest will be to actually make a land acknowledgement at the very beginning of the event, to precisely to give tribute, to give credits to those indigenous people. And that again really reminds me of how we very often maybe in a privileged position take things for granted. I think this is one thing that I think we will all share. We take our land for granted. We take Mother Nature, Mother Earth for granted. And this is something that one of my biggest takeaways after listening to all the panel members here today. So see if others have got anything else to respond before we wrap it up.
Okay, so I find this kind of interesting because many of us here have literary background. I'm also from Narratively and Jason. So I'm very interested in narratives that have been like covered here. I'm also thinking about when I'm preparing this topic about narratives and how in mainstream narratives, sometimes the narratives about climate change and climate crisis, they are being sort of reduced to the role of like villain, victims and heroes. So we have heroes here saving the world and then victims there suffering. But then as we all know, we are all the villains and the victims at the same time. So there are a lot of, I really see a lot of potentials of looking at the discourses, the cultural discourses surrounding nature and human, and as Emilie and other speakers have mentioned, how to denaturalize these concepts, and as Jason mentioned, not taking them as granted. Yeah.
Okay, so I know Emilie, Zong, our audience mostly consists of your students, and supposedly they have to end the class like 10 minutes ago. So let's not drag them too long. Any closing remarks from you, actually, Emilie, because you are the course instructor of this course. So maybe I'll pass the time back to you before we take a group photo of this particular event. Emilie, please.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Yeah, I'm sure our students really appreciate it. It's such a gift, you know, from our colleagues and from our service learning teams to actually broaden their perspectives on climate and justice, as well as, you know, both global and local perspectives. So we will gather again in our next week. So students, next week will be our last week, and I look forward to seeing you in our next week. Yes, and we're receiving actually good comments from from people seeing this dynamically inspiring panel. So thank you. Yes, Jason.
Okay, so thank you very much. Let's take a group photo before we end the session. I know maybe not a lot of your students are ready to turn on their cam. Hi, students. If you don't mind doing so, please turn on your cam. Otherwise, we'll be seeing some Teletubbies or whatsoever. But if you mind, that's okay. I will take this photo of our colleagues here. So I will do that. And Fung, can you also help us do that, please?
Yes.
Okay, so let's not wait for the students. We'll just take what we have on the screen right now. Okay, so guys, say 1, 2, 3, cheers. Okay, so thank you so much, everyone. I myself really enjoyed this really extremely interdisciplinary panel that we're having today. And I think it also echoes to what our university has been doing in terms of like transdisciplinary education and stuff like this. So thank you very much. Take care and have a good evening. Thank you very much. See you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
See ya.
Thank you.